architect have done something a little bit radical, and the whole school actually has one rather large, fairly convoluted project, but still one project for all of their, as a focus for all of their research. So I think that was a brave and exciting thing to do, but also potentially unifying for the whole school. So tell us all about it.
Thank you. So yes, as you know, I'm Jo, still wearing my label from the Kinniburgh Academics Conference, in case you forget. And I'm here from the UTS School of Architecture to tell you today about the Sydney Metropolitan Project, which is a new initiative that started late last year and has been running all of this year through the architecture school at every year level before, and all students have been exposed to it. Just to firstly introduce who we are. For those of you who don't really know about the architecture school, it sounds like a funny place where we teach people how to do drawings, but in fact it's a pretty non-traditional kind of architecture school here at UTS, and so this is, I guess, how we identify ourselves as a very open school. Our doors are very open to industry, to the public. We have a very strongly urban focus here at UTS, which sets us apart from almost every other university in Australia in terms of their architecture focus. We really deal with the issues of the city, and the fact that we're located right in the heart of the city also has an influence on that. Our staff and our students are incredibly engaged and active, and we're really about communication and local communication and international communication. So how this plays out in the way that we think about architecture practices, this kind of side of the box, if you like, which is about really cutting edge and contemporary ways of conceiving of practice. And when Tim was talking about engineering thinking before, we're really about the same sort of thing, but design thinking for architecture. But it's exactly the same kind of way of thinking. So we're looking at what are the new ways that people are beginning to interpret architecture and the idea of architecture practice, and how can that be something that we can draw on. So that's a constant thread of research for us. And then our research identities are very much, as I said before, about urban projections. We have a strong digital and fabrications focus, so fabrications technology and design technologies are about some of the ways that we execute that identity. And then this is a slide that is all about that relationship I talked with, that open, generous public relationship that we have. So this image here is from an exhibition where we open our doors and invite people in from industry and practice. There are staff, students, industry practitioners, directors of large practice, all in that photo. And so that kind of, I guess, fun side of the relationship that we have with industry is also an important part of the way that we operate. But it's not just about fun, obviously. So this is another image that deals with staff, students, people from industry, directors of practice, all in the same image, where they've come together to look at one-to-one tests of fabrication technologies and prototyping. This is a project which is all about fabrications technologies and taking these the ability of the architect to design the project in digital software, and then to use that software to actually manifest it. So taking flat sheets of essentially a kind of plastic, in this case, laser cutting them to create the formwork to create this art, which has caused a bit of a stir in architecture circles. Also, this is another way that we like to think of our interaction with the world. We have a team of people now in the architecture school who have been working with robotic fabrication in the States mostly, but also in Europe, who are now in the process of setting up our robotic fabrication lab, which will be opening very, very soon. And this is the robot fabricating some steel structural elements for an architecture pavilion that was by one of our staff in the Venice Biennale. So that's kind of the backstory to who we are. But what I'm here to talk to you about is this idea of the metropolis, and we've called it the Sydney Metropolitan Project. And so you can see by where we're located, sitting in, technology. Located right here in the heart of the city, the red dot there being the new Frank Gehry building that's being built. But this really urban setting for our school is also important in terms of our research agenda and our identity. And so our students are very much involved in thinking about and research about the city. So if we call the Sydney Metropolitan Project an umbrella strategy for our school, what that means is that we now have a unified research agenda for the entire school. And it's being executed for every year group from first year right through to fifth year master's students in their core design studio. And the design studio is that site of synthesis for all of the other curriculum areas. It's where they come together in a productive project. It's also, the Sydney Metropolitan Project is also being prioritised in the theory subjects, in our professional practice subjects, which are core and elective subjects. Professional practice being core for master's students, the theory subjects being core for undergraduate students, and the electives for master's students. And this Sydney Metropolitan Project is a part of identifying that unique role of the School of Architecture at UTS in the ideas about the city, which is different to those other universities we're talking about. So it's positioning us at the centre of a very contemporary debate. So it started out late last year as a response to the draft Metropolitan Strategy for Sydney, which was put out by the New South Wales Government. It was a discussion paper which called on for public consultation and, well, basically pretty appalling level of consideration of the potential for the urban fabric. And so by engaging right hard up against such a strategy which is in contemporary discussion in the city, it places us again at the centre of that debate. And because in the professional practice stream, a lot of the thinking is around the idea of agency for our students and for when they become architects, and the idea of advocacy. We see that as an important role for the project. So, just the it's not so fast. We talked about all of the studios. The graduate studios have all been coordinated so that their key research theme is the Sydney Metropolitan Project. The professional practice streams have used it. And then in the undergraduate studios, this is kind of a one of a better word, scaffolded kind of approach where we introduce it in small doses to the first years. We don't throw them completely into the deep end, but we introduce the ideas in small ways, and they are slowly being built on as the students move up through the years. So that's the undergraduate studios. We have research symposium days which run all day for first, second and third year students. We also have lectures on a Friday at lunchtime which have been really well supported by our students, which are by key stakeholders in the city about these issues. And then external body participation. Because we're making a claim that UTS Architecture School is dealing with this idea of the city, we've had a lot of interest from industry, from practice and from government bodies with people wanting to be involved in the discussion. So we've had a lot of involvement from the Brown Yarn at the City of Sydney, who's been coming into our Masters studio discussions, presentations and assessment days and participating in the discussions that are occurring, and also the New South Wales State Government Architect, Kinniburgh. We've also had interest from the Urban Task Force, which is essentially the developers' lobby body, to want to be part of the discussion too. And that's really exciting because it creates quite a lot of friction in the debate that the students are having to negotiate. So this is the draft Metropolitan Strategy drawing from that paper that came out last year, and essentially it just starts to identify areas of the city that are going to be thought of in particular ways. And it's essentially, we would say, it's a really dumb strategy. It's all about a single colour equals a single thing, and that's the only way we can deal with the city. And so there is no richness, there's no complexity, there is no real potential for the kinds of urban fabrics that we would imagine in an ideal scenario that are more hybridised and rich and of quality. This is really just about an idea of use. So for us, this is pretty weak. And then this is the kind of statement that goes alongside that draft Metropolitan Strategy, which says, I want a home I can afford, great transport connections, more jobs close to where I live, short commutes, right time at home for my family, park, kids, blah, blah, blah. It's obvious that we want to be able to have housing affordability, and of course we want transport connections, we want people to have good amenities and parks, but is that really all we want for our city? Is that the best that we can imagine for Sydney? And for us, this is just the paper-thin, weak surface addressing of the way our city could be. And it's coming out in response to the fact that Sydney needs this many new homes by 2031, and what we're asking our students to research and investigate in their design studios is how can we deal with that kind of number at a smaller scale. If we start to investigate what are the potentials for dealing with these very real concrete issues in an architectural project, how could that then proliferate to provide the kind of rich urban environments that we can imagine. So possibly from our point of view, a more rich and positive way of thinking about the city is this City of Sydney cultural policy paper, which is contemporary this year. But again, this is limited to the City of Sydney, and what we're interested in is researching the entire greater urban fabric. So this is an example of what we would call a more interesting, I guess, way to start to think about spaces within the city. This is a leftover space that you would probably all know well. It's the space behind the DAB and the ABCD Automotive Pedestrian Network, otherwise known as the UPN. And this is a project that the School of Architecture has had a hand in. Some of our students have actually worked on this project, and some of our staff have been involved in collaboration with Aspect Studios, being the landscape design company who are leading it. But this is looking at multiple layers and multiple uses of space, looking at the idea of hybridising and generating much more rich spaces than just a leftover gap between buildings. It's very hard to describe this when we're doing it across so many subjects to give you examples. So I think this is probably a really good example of how we can do better than just the leftover space between buildings. Our Master of Architecture studios, every one of them being framed around this idea of the Sydney Metropolitan Project. You can see some people are working in Sydney Central, dealing with the idea of Central Station and the way it basically bifurcates the city, and looking at models such as New York Grand Central Station, where it was exactly like our Central Station, and they built over alongside of it to generate the station as a connector in the city rather than a divider. Refining Kurnell, looking at the Caltech site and the idea of the potential for remediation there. And then we have some studios that are not located within Sydney, but that we can draw on research from other cities to start to inform them. So this one, Forms of Displacement by Franck Burnett, was a travelling studio where the students went to Paris. They studied the superperipherique in Paris, and then brought what they learned about that as a divisive element in the city back to Sydney, where our transport infrastructure also operates in the same way. So looking then at the potential to design better outcomes for our city. There's some other names you might know there. This is I had my students investigating the space between buildings. We have a sort of a way we do things in Sydney which doesn't think about the spaces between very well, and so asking students to investigate that. There's also people dealing with materiality and how we can deal with materials such as timber within the Sydney city when it's not a material we use, and so on. And then, so that was the first semester. Now it's the second semester. Again, we had the same kind of thing happening. In this semester, it's probably a little bit tighter because they've had a chance to run through once how this works. But we have, again, a couple of travelling studios. The Museum of the Cold War. We have students right now in Berlin looking at the idea of a divided city. And students also in the Identity Crisis studio right now in New York looking at ways that New York responds to this idea of being a metropolis and how they can bring those ideas back to Sydney. And again, some of the materials studies where Kirsten Law's looking at concrete tectonics and the ways that we can design and use concrete in new ways. So that's just some examples, I guess, of how the studios are using this idea. The focus is very much on how can we respond to our own city, but the way that we research and the places we draw things from are not. So outcomes, too much more time, I've got this. Oh,
No.
none. Okay. So I won't go through it all, but we've had new journals, lots of invitations to speak all over the city at very, I guess, influential symposia and research days. We've also had the ability to have studio coordination meetings between staff that has never occurred before. A new EU mobility grant that's pending. A number of electives coming out of the thinking that needs to go behind this kind of way of work. Lots of invitations to speak. I'm speeding up. And again, we open up the doors and put the work out there for the city, for industry and for practice to come in and be part of the discussion. These are just some of the things that we've been involved in as a result of this project. And challenges, I guess. Some of the challenges that we faced would be that staff with more established research profiles have been a little more reluctant to frame the work around the idea of the city. But on the other side of things, staff who don't have that kind of established research profile have been able to really launch themselves into a research profile very, very quickly, and it's been exciting for us, that aspect of things. And the other thing that's been a challenge is that international students don't have much interest in investing in Sydney itself, especially for those who have no intention of staying here. So that's a little bit of a challenge in terms of motivating those students. However, if they do have interest in staying here and getting visas, then they can become a resident. So just some of the students investigating some of the ideas of how we deal with gaps in the city, but I won't labour that because I've talked too long.
Liz.
No, that was incredibly exciting. The idea you've got a theme, that you go through the whole of the degree, you've actually got something to glue things together, which many schools or faculty don't have. But my question isn't about that. You just touched on it there. It's the buy-in from everybody within, it seems like such a different idea. Certainly, science don't have a clue how to do something like that. But even in your discipline, is there a critical mass of people that are bought into it that will sustain it through the next 5-10 years?
Yes, for sure. There are probably 2 faculty members who have strong enough research profiles that they don't want to buy into it. They're willing to do it for their teaching, but they don't want to buy into it for their research profile. But I think there are probably 8, maybe even 10 who are really invested now. This new journal that's coming out, we're all writing for it, and there's some really exciting names from around the world also wanting to be part of that. So I think there's definitely something that's going to keep this kind of research profile going for the school, and it makes sense in terms of our identity as a school, but also for us, it is what we know best, really best. So, yeah, definitely.
One more burning question, I think, and then we'll have to keep them for Q&A.
Considering you're doing these classes first, second, third to fifth year, how are you looking at the assessment tasks across all the years? Are they different? Are they connected?
Okay. Yeah, so the assessment tasks, or the way that we're assessing students is different. So the early year students, we're giving them tasks that require them to engage with ideas of architecture. And then a small moment where they have to think about how this could change the way we think about working in Sydney, for example. So the project is still very much being assessed based on their negotiation of the idea of architecture. As we get further up through the degree, it becomes much more about how can your conceptual framework, your theoretical basis for your project be underpinned by this idea of the Sydney Metropolitan Project, and how's that being played out in the architecture. So it becomes much more about this as the kind of core of your project, whereas in the beginning it's much more that the project is the main thing and this is just a small part of a way of thinking about how you interpret it. Did I answer your question?
You did.
Okay, thanks Jo, that was really good. Can we give her another round of applause?